You remember in 2022 some of the votes we discussed
Quite well.
in the Senate chamber. That was in May before we went to Marshall. But what we learned at that hearing certainly helped us know what questions to ask. Are you confident that with the changes you put in place, that we're not voting shares that belong to your retirees against Texas economy, against Texas jobs, against Texas values?
Yes, sir.
You can attest that to us.
Yes, sir.
Very good. I want to ask you both something, Ed. Many times when you have someone like me who has very limited knowledge of a topic, may not always ask the right questions. So we've been talking about stocks, about equities. Am I using the right term? Shares and stocks. And we've been talking about managers who deal with shares and stocks. What about general partners? What about other investments other than equities? All right, so let's lay aside for a moment stocks and those. Let's go back first to TRS. Let's talk about general partners, investments like that, and all investments other than stocks. Tell us how that's handled. Tell us about the managers. Walk through that process with us.
So generally, those managers are going to be dealing in areas like private equity or real estate. That has become a significant growth area for us over the last 15 years. Since about 2008 when we started moving into that sector. We hold those managers to the same standards we do any other manager that we utilize. We engage with them, we do due diligence before deciding to invest in them. And typically when you invest with one of these GPs, you're investing in a fund that has a specific goal or objective, and we make sure that those goals or objectives are consistent with our values and with what Texas expects from us and our fiduciary standards. We look at profitability, and we continue to exercise that as we go through the life of the investment. Typically, these investments are longer-term investments. We're not trading them on a daily basis. Typically, you make an investment and you hold it for a number of years waiting for that return to be realized. And in many cases, they return double-digit returns, and that's why they're such an attractive space. Not so much now, but they certainly were when they were first became available to us in the early 2000s. And so no difference really in the terms of how we manage them or work with them in terms of the equities or the public side where we're just trading stock and trading ownership in a company. We hold those managers to the highest standard.
If we're looking at our entire investment portfolio, percentage-wise and dollar-wise, what do we have in stocks, equities? What do we have general partners? What does the whole picture look like? That's probably in the materials, but help us understand it.
Yeah. So, if you, in fact, I'll point you to the chart that's in your appendix, which shows our asset allocation. So making sure I get you to the correct page. It's on page 13, and so you can see that about 57% of our fund is held in these global public equities, what you would consider the stock market, essentially, be that at the U.S. or internationally. We really, in terms of the private equity and the other holdings we have, are on the tail ends there. So about 40% of our holdings are in either a stable value fund or in a real return fund that could be characterized as these more private investments.
I'm gonna ask you now about investment managers, and when I use the term investment managers, I'm going to include the folks we work with that you just described, these general partners. Is that fair? Mm-hmm. So for this question, with regard to all those advisors, partners, investment managers, do we contract with managers who are members of Net Zero Asset Managers, Glasgow, GFANS, all those groups where they have pledged to use all assets under management to push an agenda that is not consistent with the Texas economy?
So we do have, full disclosure, an existing contract with BlackRock in which they are managing some assets for us on the private side and I believe, as was stated earlier, they are no longer part of those organizations here in the States, but internationally they are.
Anybody else that you know of? And again, we can follow up. I don't expect you to memorize everything, but anybody else that you can think of?
That's the highest profile one that I can think of.
Can we follow up on that?
Yes.
And I hadn't asked you before. It's okay, but we do need that information, though.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And so I'll try to take those questions in the same order with regard to employee retirement system. We talked about our discussion before. We were talking about equities, about shares, right? So other than that, for the moment, what about general partners? What about investments like we were just discussing with Mr. Guthrie?
Yeah, so in round numbers, we're about 35% invested in limited partnerships. So compared to 40% for teachers, so not that different in terms of that.
And what do we call the people that help us with those? Are they also considered managers? What do we call them? I don't mean a nice term, but how do we describe them?
So managers are general partners. The terms we'll use.
General partners. Okay, for those general partners. Let's talk about those same questions we ask about the investment managers. The general partners, what are our guidelines for deciding who to use? What are our factors? Would it be the same as for investment managers?
Yes, so it's very similar to the process for selecting investment managers. There is this asset class investment committee process that we talked about, where it goes through a strict review from 4 senior folks at the ERS, and and when you think about the limited partnership agreements that we enter into, there is always a fiduciary standard in those. So we take that very seriously. We ask about ESG and their prioritization of those factors versus their fiduciary duty. So it's a question that's front and center for us.
Oh, thank you, sir. To make sure I'm clear, those contracts which require fiduciary duty, those contracts actually speak to ESG and to how, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the contracts actually speak to ESG and how we want you to maximize returns, not do ESG. I'm not putting words in your mouth. Tell us about that. I want to make sure I heard you correctly.
Well, so to my recollection, so when you think about a contract, it will say that the manager will agree to fiduciary duty standard to
Yes.
ERS, and so it's typically silent on ESG, but it's sort of implied that fiduciary duty means no ESG. So I think that's the way we think about it.
And I'm going to ask you now about those partners and our investment managers, all the folks who are handling money for us outside of our employees. Do we use any firms, managers, banks that are members of groups like, including but not limited to GFANs, Net Zero Asset Managers, Climate Action 100? Tell us about that. And to be clear, as was discussed before, we're interested because these are those firms who have agreed publicly to use all assets under management to push this agenda, which is bad for Texas jobs and bad for the Texas economy. Do we have any outside partners, advisors, fund managers, folks handling money for us who are members of those organizations?
Not to my knowledge, Senator, but I would like to go back and just run that analysis one more time for you.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. And then also with regard to those specific funds, will you take a look for us and see what we have with AQR funds, also with Northern funds, and with PIMCO funds? And just from a voting standpoint, while BlackRock has gotten a lot better, the numbers we have show these folks are off the charts in terms of voting. Politics, bad for Texas energy, bad for Texas jobs. So that's important to us.
I can tell you now we don't do business with any of those three.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Senator Perry, you're recognized.
Yeah, real quick. So a couple things coming through that. First of all, I guess there's a definition of manager in the contract somewhere. And under that definition, does it include member, general partner, PTP, publicly traded partner, equity, stockholder, traditional things that we would equate with? Because every day there's a new entity structure that you can do business somewhere in the country. So is that what a contract would do, so that there's no misunderstanding as to who is the manager by sheer legal context? Wiggle room. Attorneys are known for wiggle room.
Right.
It's what they get paid to do.
Well, so typically in this context, we talk about a partnership agreement. So there's a general partner and a limited partner, and they need typically these are long documents that lay out exactly who does what.
That's their operating agreement.
Exactly. Well, it binds both partners in terms of what they can and can't do. And limited partners are limited partners because they are limited in their involvement of the operation of the business, right? So that's.
Well, that's a good point. I guess I want to make sure I'm clear personally. I have a limited partnership. I got a general that takes the liability hit. Usually it's a small percentage of the total deal.
Sure.
And then there's limited people that give money to go to achieve that goal. Is the state, TRS or ERS considered a limited partner, or really?
We generally characterize ourselves as a limited partner in most of our arrangements.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess
We have some direct investments where we are considered the GP, but those are our limited.
Well, I hadn't even thought about it from that angle. I thought you'd have a group of investment over here, a GP and a limited partnership doing real estate, and you would effectively, I guess that would make you a limited. Yeah. Well, that gets kind of a strange dynamic there. So contractually. The other thing is you just said something, and I guess maybe it's you got the investment policy that's pretty clear, and the one with proxy don't do ESG. But when you say implied or implicit, what would be the reason you would not implicitly state no ESG?
Well, I think part of the problem with ESG is it's like nailing Jello to the wall. As was mentioned in one of the earlier sessions,
Yeah.
ESG factors. If you talk to one manager or MSCI or ISS, they'll give you a completely different definition.
I think I missed that hearing. I really did. I'm sorry for that. So, trying to catch up a little bit, but
So I think that's part of it. Is that there are different definitions depending on who you talk to. Is that what ESG even is?
okay, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, let me follow up with that. Thank you, Senator. I appreciate what you're saying, but with regard to the asset managers, we do try to address it. If I'm reading the document correctly, overall objective from page 4, slide 4, overall objective of the investment program of ERS is to invest prudently in securities at a reasonable and predictable cost, deliver performance that supports the current and future provisions of earned benefits for members, retirees, and beneficiaries of the trust funds managed by the system. And then it says, system assets shall not be used to take any action with a purpose of furthering social, political, or ideological, if you prefer, interests. Is that language in the agreements with our partners on those deals like real estate?
I don't know it off the top of my head, sir.
It probably ought to be, shouldn't it?
Presumably.
Don't you think? I don't want to be difficult. I believe it should be. Do you agree?
I think our agreements, whether or not those words are in there, we very much believe that the language that are included in our contracts certainly have to include that in its interpretation. We'll look at our contracts.
Will you share that language with us? Not right now, but will you follow up with us on that?
Sir.
I'm going to forget, but there's real smart people that won't. Y'all are smart too, so make sure and get that to us, okay? Ms. Guthrie, same thing?
Yes, I would answer the same way. I mean, I can't guarantee that language is in the contracts, but it's certainly implied in the language. And we have a team of attorneys that works on every investment deal to make sure that our interests and our objectives are protected in those arrangements. So,
Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, that was it.
Whether that language is currently in the contracts, can you think of any reason why we would not include language like that in those contracts going forward?
I think the only reason would be to pick up on what David said, is that if you start using terms like ESG specifically, that could mean so many different things to so many different people. We'd have to very carefully define it. And you know how attorneys can be in terms of being very specific and trying to, and so it could get difficult in that sense.
But to the go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. To the extent we have language to that end in our agreements with managers, wouldn't we also have language to that end in our agreements with partners on the other?
Of course, and we try to express that with the fiduciary standards that we hold ourselves to.
Will you pull that language for us?
Yes, sir.
As well, and can we all agree that we'll take a look at this, and we'll see you again during session. Well, we'll see you before then, but we'll see you formally during session.
Yes, sir.
And we'll want to know if that's in those, if language that's acceptable is in those contracts going forward.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Sure.
Senator Perry.
I was just reminded I did not serve under your privilege back in 22, so I was on the committee. So I was like, this is not really registering. I knew about the subject matter in a global, so that's why I was like, man, I must have missed this one, but I wasn't here. I'm picking up on what you're saying, and it is concerning a little bit. Not not anything wrong. The more prescriptive we can get, the possibility of more wiggle room we create. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's fair.
And so, Mr. Chairman, as much as just common sense contract law that I've unfortunately dealt with for 40 some odd years, prescriptive was really cool. But in legislature and statutes, I've found that agencies can use that against us. I would assume people outside in that world. So as we go down that path, maybe there's a balance to strike where I think clarity, but not leave some wiggle room there where they can say, but you didn't, you didn't say it this way, so we're on the hook. I can appreciate both sides now. It's good information.
I can too, and I can. And I would only state that given that there are terms like that in contracts with fund managers, if we can figure out how to do it there, then we can figure. You're right. We have to get it right. You're so right. You're so right. We need to do it for anybody who's handling money on behalf of the taxpayers. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Okay, so thank y'all. Thank you very. I don't have anything else, senators. Any other questions? Thank you. And hey, listen, thanks for what you're doing to maximize those returns. And a lot is asked of you, and thank you for doing it. And those retirees, people in Texas appreciate it. Those retirees appreciate it, and thank you for your important work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.